Welcome to today's webinar and online special lecture series. Today we have Dr. Rajadipta Roy once again with us, and he will be speaking on ROSENCRANTZ and GUILDENSTERN are dead. And we are very happy to have him back. Welcome, sir, once again. And I think we can start with the lecture. The students will join soon.
So may I?
Sure.
Yes, sir. I think you can start.
Thank you then. Well, I'm not switching off my microphone anymore then. I'm continuing right away. This is 11 already. Hearty welcome and very good morning to everybody, and my naturally and greetings and gratitude to the staff of Department of English of Malda College, especially to Anuradhati, and also to the respected head of the department and the respected principals of Sarah Madam. First of all, the very vital information that I require from you students is that this very text, who are taking the class? Is it the UG course or the PG course? And which year are you in, or in which semester?
Actually, it is in PG course, and
Yep.
PG course, and who has taken the class? Who's taken Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? I don't exactly
Fourth
remember.
semester.
Anybody can
Fourth
join you.
semester, Matt. It is there in fourth semester. That is second year of PG course.
This is the second year of PG course. Thank you very much, because and that makes it a little bit more easier to understand what kind of audience that I'm actually addressing. Well, right into the thing. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Ross and Gill are dead. And that is the famous text of Tom Stoppard. When I was going through the text again for preparing for this class, first time I went through this text, sometimes around 15 or 10, more than 15 years back. Then this digital revolution was about to happen, but it did not happen still then. So therefore, we did not have that access on those digital archives and the PDF files and whatever it is, which simply keep rushing onto your screen once you click on any single title or topic related to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Now it is being littered with all kinds of articles and all kinds of things, and thesis works and MPhil and PhD works, etc., etc. So this is quite tough, and to trudge your way through that heavily littered forest of different informations and scholarly articles and etc. to find a kind of a pristine view, a pristine look of this well-read text. It is read so many times and in so many different ways all over the world, and all of them are, or most of them are gathered over there, heaped up on there on the internet archives. So this is quite easy. One gets easily clueless how to approach this text. Again, in a little bit of a new way into the class, because there are so many repetitions and repetitive topics which are being discussed over the years. Repetitive issues are being dug up to deal with the text, to understand the text, to read the text, to level the text in some particular tight water compartments like absurdity and existentialist text, etc., etc. So once and for all, I was very much pinned down by this heavy burden that how shall I get a different kind of a look on the text. Especially now when I am meeting this very brilliant and shiny bunch of students out here over the digital platform of Google Meet. And then I thought that, well, let me do one thing. Let me just brush aside all these repetitive scholastic churnings which are being heaped upon the text as a label. And I shall simply try to be as honest as possible to the text itself, and I shall not simply be bothering about what are being told about the text. So I shall be simply bothering about the text, shall allow a kind of an autonomy to the text while reading it. And I'm requesting you to also do the same thing, that if all of us do allow this kind of an autonomy to the text, which the text deserves, and if we, for a little bit of time, for 1 hour or so, simply keep our use, deep towards that heavy archive of readings of the text, representations of the text, if we simply try to be very honest to the presentation of the text, not the representations, then a different kind of an outlook also comes out, and a different kind of a take on the text also comes out, that materializes. So that was my experience while reading it, or while going through it, while trying to, when I attempted to give it a second look, second reading, after so many years, second or third or whatever it is. So I shall try to read that text, being honest to the text, from that angle, that I find it very much interesting and important to understand not only this text, but any text of Tom Stoppard, because Tom Stoppard is a playwright, already. You must have come across those PDF articles and etc., scholarly texts, scholarly writes up on this text. That Tom Stoppard is not a very easy playwright. He cannot be easily pinned down to any particular platform of reading, like what we normally do. There is a tendency with us, all of us, whoever are in professionally into this activity of reading, that we always try to understand an author with regard to the level. The levels are already being prefixed. It's almost like an conscience a priori, which is already working at the back of our head, and then we try to understand what kind of an author is he, and what kind of a take I should take. Now, this should is a very, very political word. This is already being, preordained, pre-narrated, pre-text, under a heavy pretext of reading something with a level, basically destroys and demolishes our way of reading itself. That happens with Tom Stoppard. Tom Stoppard is a challenging playwright for different reasons. Of course, he is not that much famous like Beckett, still. And of course, he is not that much incisive sometimes, like Edward Albee. But he is definitely somebody who is very important, absolutely a distinct voice, for this reason that his plays refuse to fit into these tight water compartments, like only being absurdist text, only being an absurdist text, or an existentialist text, or a sociopolitically aware text, or a communist text, or a socialist text, or absolutely a capitalist and essentialist text, whatever it is. These categories or these compartments cannot contain Tom Stoppard always with easiness. He cannot be easily pinned down. This is one reason for which Tom Stoppard is famous. And there is another thing also. There is a big host of critics who think that Tom Stoppard has simply done he feeds on other dramatists, other playwrights, and he has simply made his reputation on feeding on, this is a very bad word they use normally, feeding on Shakespeare, feeding on Beckett, and especially with regard to this text, Ross and Gill are dead. It is being charged that he is being feeding on Pirandello, 6 characters in search of a dramatist, Waiting for Godot of Beckett, and definitely this whole text is being built upon Shakespeare's Hamlet. So as if he is feeding on them, he is behaving like a sponge or something like that. When I went through the text again and tried to find out my way through that heavy forest of different kinds of prefixed readings. I found out that with regard to the structural element, with regard to the structure, the themes developed in the play, and the issues, I wrote down something. Of course, I am not directly reading from passage to passage from these things, but I will simply point out some of the basic elements that I have wrote down already, about, which are, I think, applicable to the text, to the reading of the text. That structurally, thematically, and issue-wise, mostly these itemized words are being, or these itemized fields are being normally applied to the reading of this one. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and those are, if itemized, they stand as number one. Most of them say this is an absurdist play, though it is not directly an absurdist play. This is basically asking questions to the very mode of absurdism. And absurdity are there, absurdities are there, absurdities of life are being explored in the text, definitely, but it is not fitting into the typical absurdist notion as it was being formulated by the big theoretician of absurd called Martin Esslin. And secondly, it is being read as an existentialist tragicomedy. Of course, existentialism is there. Of course, existentialism is there to a large extent. And still, this is not directly an existentialist play, because an awareness gradually dawns upon the characters through the course of the three acts unto the last of the play, unto the conclusion of the play, in such a manner which defies some of the basic criteria of existentialism, be it the existentialism read by or understood by Sartre, be it the different existentialism read and understood by Camus, or be it the different existentialism read and understood by the hardcore existentialist philosopher Merleau-Ponty. Existentialism is various. There are basically existentialisms. Now, this play might affect and is already being characterized by some of the features common to the notions of all three different existentialist parameters. But directly, it is asking some different question. The question is not only limited to the question of existence, it is limited to the question of reading also. What existence is, this is important. How do we read existence? That also is important for this text. This, how do we read existence, not only of us, but also of the other people, or also of the most famous people or the famous characters like Hamlet, that is also becoming very much important here. Then comes the idea of meta-theater. This is a structural point of view. We already know that this text is, you have already gone through it. I assume that this is a very small play, so naturally you have already gone through it, and there are moments which are very laughable. There are comic moments, good humor is there, good polished humor is there. So therefore, it's an enjoyable reading. And sometimes, though there are very serious scopes to ponder on, but still this is a very enjoyable reading. Now, you already know that this is a meta-theatrical text, or the concept of meta-theater is very much alive. Whenever we think of this text, it comes alive, it's animated, because the play is constructed absolutely on the dialogues of two minor characters from Hamlet, who you already know, Rose and Gil, who were the classmates of Hamlet back in this Danish university, or Danish school of Wittenberg, as it is being already informed by Shakespeare in his Hamlet. And naturally, these minor characters have to play some roles within the play. Those portions are also there, or at least being reported there. Some portions are there and some reportings are there. And at the same time, how these actors are or how these people who are acting or who are carrying out the roles of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, or Rosencrantz and Guildenstern themselves, how do they live their life? What do they think? What are their problems, their existential malady, their questions of life, just not within the text but outside the text when they are preparing to enter into the play or on the stage from behind the wings, that out of wings life is also being incorporated into this text. So therefore, there are basically not only they are breaking the fourth wall, but they are breaking, in fact, all the walls. It is basically a play, not only within a play, but it is beyond also the play. Meta means beyond, you already know because you have had your undergraduation, and there is a famous thing we have to always repeat in the classes, that what is metaphysical. Before going into the concept of metaphysical, every teacher almost hits upon this particular explanation all over the world, perhaps, that meta is a Latin word and it means beyond. So beyond the physical. So you already have formed this idea that this is meta theatrical, means this is beyond the scope of a simple theater. This is encapsulating or encompassing within the theatrical experiences, the theatrical text, and also the text pertaining to the life of the characters who are playing the roles beyond the scope of the theater. So these are two different kinds of things. The grand narrative of life and the small narrative of theater are all combined together into this meta-theatrical structure. This is there. And of course, another Derridian notion of a parody is also applied upon this text, Ross and Gillard did, because this is definitely a parody. This is a subversion, a derivative subversion of Shakespeare's Hamlet. The characters are being taken, the incidents are being taken, and a whole chunk of Shakespeare's texts are being taken to put into this, to fit into this play of Tom Stoppard. So this is almost reading at a single time two different texts while we go through this particular three-act play. We are at once reading Shakespeare, and also we are reading the text produced by Tom Stoppard. And there are scopes which are being put over there in such a manner that it parodies the actions, parodies the themes, parodies the issues. Parody, this very term, as I told you already, I am taking it in the Derridian sense, not in the typical Hindi movie sense. Parody is a big thing, pastiche and parody are the two words you already know, perhaps you are acquainted with these technical terms. These were the two words which were being taken up by and defined by Derrida in a different context from a different angle. He says that this whole experience of ours and this whole experience of writing again, this very urge of writing again, being a writer in the modern world, is nothing but a parodying and pastiching experience built upon the epistemic knowledge of the other writers who have already written down their or narrated their experiences. So we are always building our narrations depending on the narrations which are already existing. In a sense, we are pastiching them either, or we are parodying them in one way or the other. This can be taken also in a different way from the concept of from the point of view of, if we look at it, this whole idea of parodying and pastiching from the point of view of Mikhail Bakhtin, that great Dostoevsky scholar, and afterwards he is being hailed as one of the best aestheticians, the theoreticians of one of the best theoreticians of novel and what a novel is, in his great book Dialogic Imagination and Dostoevsky's novels, etc. He described its core, for a long duration, what this dialogic imagination is. And then he talks about the idea of engagement. So again, parodying and pastiching are also, if we take this, we are taking this from the premise of Derridian ideas, and if we just place them within the premise of Bakhtinian idea, then we find that parody and pastiche are also basically engagements of the modern writer with the all the writings, the whole corpus of writing of the other writers who have already written down lot of texts, the texts of, what should I say, the ur text or the whole archive of literary texts produced before us. We are always basically connecting for our suggestions, for our images, for our symbols, everything to the texts and to the practices which are already been produced. So in this case, we are basically engaging into a dialogue with our past practices and also with our past thoughts. Parody and pastiche can also be taken from this Bakhtinian angle as an attempt of engagement with our whole episteme of literature. This is one thing, and the other issue, which also comes, which are also very much discussed in this, while reading this play, is that how far Shakespeare has, how far Tom Stoppard has dwelt on Shakespeare and has built on Shakespeare his ideas, his philosophy, his characters, and the actions and the themes of this play. In this case, I shall try to take two different words. These two words I thought when I was giving this second reading that very important to understand the work of Tom Stoppard. Tom Stoppard is basically calling for a paradigm shift in our way of looking at things, especially the things which are already there, present in front of us in the form of a finished text, like that of Hamlet. How can we read that? Tom Stoppard is basically engaging into a different kind of a reading from multiple different perspectives with Hamlet. And in this way, the very important words which are coming into focus and coming into play in reading this text, to my mind, are one is intertextuality and another is heterotopia. Somebody has switched on the microphone. Please, I request you to switch off the microphone. So these are the two words. One is intertextuality, another is heterotopia. I must say that this is a heterotopic text, and also this is an intertextual text. Now, intertextuality is a different kind of thing. Before going into that, I will what intertextuality is, or how intertextual reading is important to go through the principal argument created within this text by Tom Stoppard. I have to first harp on the conventional themes which are being dealt with in this play. Conventional, rather to say, the common themes which were very common in most of the plays produced around the middle of, by the 5th or the 6th or the 7th decades of Europe. This is an European text, very much, and Tom Stoppard is a British one. Of course, his parentage comes from, his lineage comes from Czechoslovakia, and that also plays a big role in the selection of his topics and in the selection of his passages from Shakespeare and the other writers. But that is different thing. He is definitely a naturalized citizen of Britain, as his stepfather is a British one. And at the age of 6 or 7 or something like that, he went to England. You know that he was residing over there in Bristol, and since then he is being imbibed into the British culture because he is educated in the British schools. He has taken up British language, or the English language, in the British English language as his language, and he produces in that language. He has not communicated with anybody in Czechoslovakian language or the Czech language, or the Slavonic language, for over 50 years almost with anybody. And after a gap of 50 long years, he came back to Czechoslovakia somewhere around 1977 or 1979 or something like that. Or else, more of, 1977 or 79, or by the end of the 80s, perhaps. And that was his almost the first matured and first important visit to Czechoslovakia, his parental and his lineage. But he is basically a British playwright. And as being a British playwright, he also his themes also reflect some of the common trends which were being found almost as a characteristic phenomenon in all the British texts or British dramatic texts produced from 50s to the 70s in Great Britain, especially in and around, and especially after the um, cataclysmic experience of the Second World War. And those are these, and that the focus is always on the anxiety of uncertainty, the inexplicable powers that govern our world, the impossibility of personal agency, and the mystery of death. Now, these are the four things: the anxiety of uncertainty, the inexplicable powers that govern our world, the impossibility of personal agency, and the mystery of death. And it is usually held that Tom Stoppard talks about the absurd phenomenon called human life on this very accidental, what should I say, the accidental platform called Earth, and the absurdity of language and its meaning formation, and the aporia existing between the signifier and the signified as we use our language on our daily life, uh, almost on a regular scale. There is always this aporia, the scope of this aporia, what we say and what we mean, do always not only they do not go in hand, they basically conflict, and uh, mostly this conflict is conflated in a different manner, so that the meaning desired by us is most of the times is not the meaning that we finally end up with. So this is the kind of aporia, and this is the kind of ironical situation of language and wordplay which are there also very much present in Tom Stoppard. He is basically a freak of using wordplays. He has a freakish love for wordplays and the idea of language. It is basically the Wittgensteinian idea of language that he is always using and employing in his plays, all his plays. And there comes this meta-theatrical devices, and the fabric of our universe and man's place and purpose within it are his basic focus. Man's purpose in this universe and his purposelessness, if it is there, and also this fabric of our universe and how this universe operates and who are we within this universe. Is this universe something that really exists, or have we made it exist only through our language and only through our narration? There's a big question in Tom Stoppard, and this repeatedly is being addressed in all his texts. There is a very important text of Stoppard produced around 1979, very challenging and theatrically also. Its name is Dogs, Hamlet, D-O-double-G, apostrophes, Dogs, Hamlet, and Cahoot's Macbeth. No, Cahoot is the name of a Czechoslovakian absurd playwright, and his Macbeth. And Macbeth, we know that Macbeth is a famous tragedy of Shakespeare, and Macbeth was inordinately ambitious, and that inordinate ambition was a cause for his downfall, blah, 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 blah. But Macbeth also gives us a very good scope to study how power operates. And Cahoot, one Czechoslovakian playwright and a friend of Tom Stoppard, he wrote one Macbeth in this Slavonic language of theirs, in their mother tongue. And immediately after that, he was being censored because Czechoslovakia is under the very, very, what should I say, and the iron rule of those. At that point of time, when Cahoot was writing on this play back in 1977 and 78, it was then heavily under the rule of the communists. This is a kind of an iron curtain. You cannot always criticize, you cannot exercise your democratic. That was the condition, basically, that you could not exercise your democratic powers, democratic rights, and you cannot criticize the power itself. And in whatever manner the power is challenged, that your text or your words or your statements, your writing, etc. If the theme that this is a challenge put towards a power position of the communists or the central government, then they would naturally be bringing down that exop censorship on everybody. Cahoot's text was censored, and Cahoot himself was censored. He was prohibited from publishing anything for the next 1 year or so, 18 months or so, something like that. He was simply being banned by the government. Stoppard did not take it well because Stoppard thought, and rightly so, that this is a big violation of human rights, and he stepped in and he took the text of Cahoot and then he gave it a different kind of an English rendering. It is not merely a translation, it is also the reading of Stoppard which was being incorporated into that text. Why am I talking about that text? I'm coming to that point, that when writing about this thing, Stoppard made his policy and his politics very clear in 1979 when he published this book called Dogg's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth. Then you see immediately a relationship between Ross and Gill and that Dogg's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth are being already breached up. There is already a relationship. A connection is almost unearthed between the two texts. This text that we have to study today, or we are studying today, was produced back in 1967. It was written somewhere around 1964. That was the first version. It was an one-act play, and afterwards it was developed in a much better way in the three-act portion, in the three-act version that we find it today, in our syllabus. And this is the second version, which has hit the international audience and international podium. That was been published back in 1967. Dogg's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth. That book, this is the name of the book, Dogg's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth. This book was being published in 1979. So with a gap of 12 long years, we see that Stoppard is again harping deliberately on the two texts of Shakespeare. One is Hamlet, another is Macbeth. Now this time, this Macbeth was the Macbeth read by Cahoot and then reread by Tom Stoppard. Stoppard is quite, prone to give different or multiple readings to a single text. You see what happens in this text also, Rose and Gill are dead. We see that there was one Hamlet whose name was basically Amlet, Amleth. There was a story of a Danish prince called Hamlet. Actually, he was a nobleman, and his melodies and etc., etc. That Hamlet, if we take it as the mother text, the parent text, in that case, it is known as the Ur text. Now, from that Ur text, there was one person called Marston who created another text, Antonio's Revenge, in England, somewhere around 1586 or 1590, something like that. And there was another text inspired by that Ur Hamlet, that was the Spanish tragedy by Keats. Shakespeare develops his text of Hamlet depending on all three texts. Marston's text, and then comes Keats' tragedy, and of course, definitely the Danish history of Hamlet, L-E-T-H. When Shakespeare finally produced his Hamlet in 1603, Shakespeare was also giving it a remote reading, rereading, in a way that the text itself becomes something absolutely different, with the policy and the politics of Shakespeare coming into play to find out and to read the historical happenings, whatever happened in the past in Denmark. There is first this happening, then comes the first Hamlet or the Hamlet. This is the Ur Hamlet. This is the first reading of the phenomenon. Then comes the second reading of the phenomenon in the hand of Marston or Keats. And after Marston and Keats, there comes this third reading of Hamlet or the same things by Shakespeare. And then comes the fourth reading in the hand of Tom Stoppard back in 1967 in Rose and Gill Are Dead. The whole focus of the text is being taken away from the central characters or the principal characters to the minor characters. And not only the minor characters, it's a different kind of a character or a characteristic which is being explored in Hamlet, within Hamlet, the text of Shakespeare or the reading of Shakespeare. Basically, the text of Shakespeare is also a reading of Shakespeare. Shakespeare read Hamlet in that way, what he produced. And Tom Stoppard reads at once Hamlet itself and Shakespeare also. And he is now trying to put up a dialogue with Shakespeare while picking up his two minor characters as his, Stoppard's, the later's, principal characters. Hamlet is definitely the principal character of Shakespeare's Hamlet. But for Stoppard, this is Rose and Gill, who are the principal characters. So the minor are being transformed into a major character in this play of Stoppard. Naturally, you can understand that the major will be rendered as a minor one. And how does a major character appear or a minor character appear, or how the major and the minors are defined in a theater or in a play? Simply because the perspective, the central perspective that of a character, if a character's perspective, or if a character's, what should I say, treatment, focus on a character helps to formulate or to develop the central perspective of the drama, then that character is known as a major character. And if a character's perspective on things are not taken as the central developer of the theme, but merely as an assistance towards the principal or the central character, or to develop the central character, the other characters thronging around him, then those characters are known as the minor characters. So the central focus is always enjoyed by the perspective of the central character, then he is a major character. And if the central focus is not enjoyed by the perspective of the other characters, then they are the minor characters. In this case, Rose and Gill, being the minor characters of Shakespeare, enjoy the major position of focus. That is the focal point on which the whole play is developed. So therefore, in Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, we look at Rose and Gill or any other minor character from the perspective of either Hamlet or the playwright or whoever is there who are trying to project Hamlet as a hero, as a central character, as a protagonist. But in Rose and Gill are dead, in Stoppard's play, we are looking at Hamlet. The whole thing is simply being reversed. We are trying to look at Hamlet from the perspective of Rose and Gill. This is the paradigm shift that I was talking about. What happens in Rose and Gill are dead. And that is quite interesting because finally Stoppard is creating a statement out there. In absurd plays, the statement comes in a different manner. In Waiting for Godot, Vladimir and Estragon does not help you with some direct dialogue from which you can say that this is the thing, this is the crux, this is the central point of the play. Of course, there are very beautiful things from which we can take a cue to the basic philosophy of Samuel Beckett. But still, the whole play is built upon the philosophy of absurdity. Man's position in this universe and how absurd and how purposeless is that. This is the central focus. Now, apart from the characters, the focus is somewhere else. The character is not voicing out the focus, not necessarily. The characters are caught in a universe which is being dominated by that absurd focus of the playwright. In this way, we try to understand the basic nihilism existing within the universe of Waiting for Godot. But in this play, Tom Stoppard's Rose and Gill are dead. We see that there is a continuous communication between Shakespeare and Stoppard, so to say, Hamlet and Rose and Gill. So this continuous dialogic formation, dialogue formation, and this continuous building up of the formulation of the dialogic imagination, if we borrow the term from Bakhtin, we see that Depending on this Bakhtinian principle of the dialogic imagination, the polyphony created within the text, the minor characters, and especially Guildenstern in this case, because he is the aware character here, partially aware at least, if not totally aware, at least partially aware. And Rosencrantz is somebody who has lost his cue with time, with space. So anything absurd, whatever is happening out here, the loss of memory, there is no past, the time scheme is being practically muddled up in the whole play. And every principle, whatever applies to the idea called absurdist play, of an idea called absurdist play. That absurdism is very much present or propagated by the character of Ross, that is Rosencrantz. But if we come down to Guildenstern, we see that Guildenstern is being partially informed with awareness right from the beginning, and by the end, it is absolutely a different kind of a magic and epiphany that happens. How does that happen? That I am coming to. That I shall try my level best to discuss with you, because I have already put down some of the dialogues. You will allow me, please, to go through some of the dialogues of the play. And on the dialogues, I have put on some tags that will help us to understand how the whole play, basically, if we keep honest to the play, as I was talking of earlier, that the reading of the play itself, just brushing away all the criticism built up on the play. If we go through the reading of the play, word by word, statement by statement, punctuation by punctuation, then we see that a different voice, a different tonality, a different treatment of the whole theme is coming out into focus. A statement is made. How is this made? It is made in an intertextual way. And how does intertextuality operate? Intertextuality is not merely, you know already, perhaps, I assume that you know, but just I shall harp on one single factor of intertextuality. It's a heavy thing. There are big books written on intertextuality and how does it operate and what intertextuality is. I'm not going to define that, but I will try to understand it with you from a particular angle or from a particular perspective. Is that it is not merely referring to another text. Say, suppose we say that there are two texts, text A and text B. And if we think that these two texts are intertextual, we can understand, following the linear logic of alphabetical order, the text A comes first and text B comes later. So that we can say that, well, fine, text B is intertextual to text A. Means that the basic proposition and the philosophical and the aesthetic and the discourse premise of text B are absolutely built upon the understanding of text A. This is one way of intertextual journey. But intertextuality also gives us another thing, or rather, I might use this very cliche, very hackneyed image, that it opens another window or another door also. From the conventional notion of intertextuality or intertextual idea, we can always say that, well, to understand not only the movement of the play, but the discourse made by the play, discourse present within the play, within a text B, we have to understand what was the discourse made by or proposed by text A. So the understanding of text A operates as a key to unlock the mystery of text B. This is one way of looking at intertextuality. There is also another thing. This very word, inter, is very much important here. It is not only two texts and for which one-way traffic is being diagrammed in this way, that the text A is necessary to understand text B. It is not only that reason for which the term is being coined as intertextuality. It's a two-way traffic. It's always a two-way traffic. Text B also provides some other different keys to read the basic proposition of text A. It means that text B stands modified by the knowledge of text A, but at the same time, text A also stands modified by the knowledge and the informations provided by text B. So the text A is important to understand what the text B is. It is of course interconnection. It's a two-way traffic. Text B is also providing us a different gaze, a different perspective, a different focus, a different reading of the pre-existing text A. Let me make it a little more clear with this example that now, if we take this principle of intertextuality to operate between Shakespeare's Hamlet and Stoppard's Rose and Gill are Dead, and then we come across this thing, we hit upon this idea of intertextuality that the basic understanding of Hamlet is required to understand or to approach a proper, healthy reading of Rose and Gill are Dead. Yes, okay, fine, it's accepted. But Stoppard is intelligent enough to tell us that the reading of Rose and Gill are Dead also providing us some understanding and some different perspective to take a second look of Hamlet. Now, in this way, Hamlet stands, the reading of Hamlet stands modified once we finish reading Rose and Gill are Dead. This is a paradigm shift achieved by this particular idea of intertextuality. My point is, Rose and Gill best be understood in terms of that intertextual approach. How does that happen? Let me just quote some of the lines at random, of course, but I have selected them with a purpose in my mind. It's a kind of a journey from the first act to the last act and, of course, to the conclusion that will perhaps help me to discuss this thing and will perhaps help you to understand also what I am trying to build up from this intertextual angle on this text. The play is divided in 3 acts, and you already know because you have gone through the text that the first act occupies almost 1/3 of the play. And then comes the second act, which is a heavier one, and the heaviest one, most speedy and most momentous part of the whole play is the third act. This very idea, this very level this very practice of labeling Rose and Gill are Dead as an absurdist text owes its only source to this first act, because the first act is absolutely formulated as a typical, almost stereotypical absurdist text, but with a single exception. In the case of Waiting for Godot, which is also one of the most important texts with which a dialogue is being formed between, dialogue is being formed by this text of Stoppard. In Waiting for Godot, right from the beginning, Vladimir and Estragon are not given any awareness, philosophical awareness, that is explicitly absent in them, conspicuous by its absence. But this particular deviation from the absurdist practice can be located in the very first act also of this play. We see that awareness is there when Guildenstern says, I'm reading it slowly just to help you to look at the lines within the text if you are already sitting with the text. Awareness, how it is being affected, Guildenstern says that I am the essence of a man betting against, as they were betting, and it was almost 90 times that the head fell, the tail was not falling, and ROSENCRANTZ was winning over the bet. They were flipping the coins, and Guildenstern always told that, what is it? ROSENCRANTZ used to call out, that he uses to call out heads, and it's always heads. And there is a gibberish thing called scientific theory of probability and blah, 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 blah. After all these gibberish things and making language almost a kind of a ridiculous tool of communication, then all on a sudden Guildenstern says, I am the essence of a man betting against himself in private atonement for an unremembered past. He also does not remember anything. He says that. But Rosencrantz necessarily does not have that feeling of remorse for not remembering anything from his past. The loss of memory for Rosencrantz comes without affectation. But for Guildenstern, this is basically the root of his crisis. And as this is the root of his crisis, so naturally he is aware of the suffering. The moment he is aware of the suffering, he is the one who is caught into this existential mire called existence itself, physical existence in this world. Says, I am the essence of a man betting against himself in private atonement. Atonement, this is the word, repenting for an unremembered past. Then he spins a coin across. And just after that, after some lines, he reflects on the idea of time and says that time has stopped dead, and a single experience of one coin being spun once has been repeated 90 times. It is not that only time is dead, the very idea of time, linear time, scientific quantum of time, but at the same time, time is dead. And what is life? Life is nothing but an endless repetition of activities which are all ineffectual and insignificant. Definitely, this affects the tone of a nihilist. Then comes on the vacuity of philosophic excursus and the mockery of the ineffectivity of language. He says, what is language? A scientific approach to the examination of phenomena is a defense against the pure emotion of fear. And Ross says, another curious scientific phenomenon is the fact that the fingernails grow after death, as does the beard. This is comic, this is mocking, this is almost a kind of a satire on the very structural idea of language. Says that Guildenstern, when he was trying to make a philosophic statement on our mode of understanding anything, whatever happens around us, and positing fear as a qualifying element to recognize our experiences as material or materialistic experiences, Ross is telling that, well, I am also giving you one information. Gill says that I am giving one information of a scientific theory, that this is fear, which is the elemental requirement for us to understand that we exist, almost like that. Ross says that another curious scientific phenomenon that I can inform you of is the fact that the fingernails grow after death, as does the beard. This is absolutely gibberish. No meaning in it. This is definitely a scientific truth, but this is no way comparable to the heaviness of the philosophic excursus made by Guildenstern. In this way, Guildenstern is naturally very much annoyed and says that what? And in that very what, that expression, Benedict Cumberbatch was the actor who acted out that part of Rosencrantz, and it was beautiful. And in this play, we see that performance is a big thing for Tom Stoppard's plays. When we read it, it makes a kind of a meaning, but when we see it, it becomes a different kind of a thing. Because these are basically 4 texts that we are reading at once. One is this text, another is Hamlet, another is this whole thing produced by Waiting for Godot and 6 characters in search of a dramatist, and also the performance itself becomes a text. There are 4 texts at once operating within the same text, within a single text in this Rosencrantz dead. And after that, I'm simply coming on to Act 2. There are several other important quotable lines, but I'm skipping up on that. They are also reflecting on the idea of God, idea of choice, etc. Because we know that for Sartre and for Camus also, in the existentialist philosophy, in their idea of existentialism, they always told us that, they always wrote on this, that choice is a big thing. Freedom of choice is a big thing for us to live in this world, because we are ordained with, as Sartre said, we are being cursed with freedom of choice. And that is our existential crisis. Had we have no freedom of choice, had we have simply lived in a deterministic world or a determined world, that would practically be very refreshing for us. And that would naturally ameliorate that crisis of our living. But this existential crisis, this angst, generates from this idea that we can exercise our choice, we are free to exercise our choice, and still we know that this is an inescapable world system in which we are being caught. So they are amusing upon that, and Ross says that, is there a choice? Do we have a choice? Because we are insignificant minor characters of Shakespeare's play. We are nothing just. And this nothingness is very important because the whole statement of the play is built on that nothingness. The insignificance of two common persons called ROSENCRANTZ and GUILDENSTERN, who are basically we, the readers. We are not at all as major as Hamlet in the whole play of life, in the meta-narrative of life. We are nobody. They are nobodies. So therefore, they don't have any choice. He asks, ROSENCRANTZ says that, is there a choice? And Gill answers, is there a God? There is no choice. The answer is simply hinted at, suggested. As for Shelley, we know that Shelley in his last line left it unanswered in that famous ode to the West Wind. He simply puts a question out there with a big question mark. If there is winter, can spring be far behind? And we naturally come up with the answer, being the reader. We become a part of the whole poetic process of Shelley, to the West Wind. We are included into the poetic imagination of Shelley, and we come to almost spontaneously answer to the question, reply to the question that yes, of course, spring comes after winter. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? This is a question with which the ode ends. We come up with the reply. Shelley does not become the prophet. It's a different kind of a prophet. He was acting like a prophet out there, but we come up with the answer, the message of the God, or the message of the universe, or the transcendental message of change, that yes, spring always comes after winter. Day always comes after night. The hope is with us. Shelley is not giving us any hope. Shelley is simply exciting the hope or harping on the hope that is already inbuilt within us. This is a big difference between a Christian prophet and Shelleyan prophet. Christian prophet always comes down with the message, but Shelleyan prophet does not come up with the message. He comes up with the question, and the message is already lying with us. The answer is already lying with us. This is a democratic inclusion of the reader into the very body of the text. This thing simply happens out here also. In Ross and Gill are dead, Ross is asking, is there a choice? And the answer comes from Gill, again in the manner of a different question, says, is there a God? And of course, the answer is lying with us, the common people, the brethren, the innumerable replications of ROSENCRANTZ and GUILDENSTERN's in the reality called life. We are not Hamlet, but Ross and Gill. We come up with the answer, no, there is no choice. No, there is no God. In Act 2, all of a sudden, Ross, when the action thickens, talks about Hamlet and says that he murdered us. And Gill says he might have had the age. Now, the way he uses the word he murdered us, of course, Hamlet murdered them. Hamlet was the person who manipulated the later, which were being taken by ROSENCRANTZ and GUILDENSTERN to England or the English king, where Hamlet was supposed to go. And the order in between the later was that whenever Hamlet reaches over there, should be killed or executed. Hamlet manipulates the later. You already know that. And Hamlet writes over there because a seal of his father's ring was already there with him in his pocket. He used that. He tore open the letter. He saw the message and he manipulated the line that the carriers of this letter must be executed at once whenever you receive the letter. And in this way, ROSENCRANTZ and GUILDENSTERN were being sent to England and then they were being executed over there. And by the last act, Act 5, Scene 4, line number 410 or 411, something like that, A messenger comes to Horatio when Hamlet is dead, Claudius is dead, Lettice is dead, Gertrude is dead, Ophelia is dead, Polonius is dead, everybody is dead back in Denmark. And then a messenger comes back from England. Ambassador comes from England and reports to 14 Press and Horatio that, well, ROSENCRANTZ and Guildenstern are dead. Now that is the title. The title is being taken from that Act 5, Scene 4. So now from Act 2, they are heavily conversing now, not with Hamlet only, but with the whole idea of a tragedy as it is being understood by Shakespeare in the text called Hamlet. Tragedy always happens according to the Aristotelian norm, or even according to the Renaissance norm, to a person gifted with exceptions. It's an extraordinary person, and that extraordinary person enjoys the status of being a major character. And what is the extraordinariness of Ross and Gill? They are very much ordinary. They don't have anything extraordinary. They're insignificant. And that is the extraordinary situation of our life as we live it now in everyday mundane frame of temporality called life, our life, the realistic, materialistic life. We are all insignificant people, just like Ross and Gill. We are not major characters. The Shakespearean notion of building a tragedy on the basis of a major character, extraordinary character, does affect a kind of a notion of elitist politics. This elitism is put into question by Guildenstern and ROSENCRANTZ. How it is being done? They say, Ross says that he murdered us, and Gill says he might have had the age. And then comes the most important intertextual point. Says, reading Hamlet, they are basically reading Hamlet from a different standpoint. As I told you, that intertextuality is a two-way traffic. Ross and Gill are helping us to have a different take on Hamlet, and that different take is basically the statement created by Ross and Gill, or prioritized by Ross and Gill. What happens? The different thing? Gill says, we got his symptoms, didn't we? We know that in Hamlet, in the Shakespearean text, Claudius and Gertrude set Ross and Gill, being the childhood acquaintance of and childhood classmates of Hamlet, they were the persons, the bad king Claudius, the usurper king Claudius, and Gertrude, Hamlet's mother. They set ROSENCRANTZ and Guildenstern as spies on Hamlet. Their purpose was to glean as much information out of Hamlet as possible and to disseminate them to Claudius, because they were trying to keep a track on Hamlet. This is definitely following the structure of Foucault's structure, described in Power and Knowledge. He was basically talking about a panopticon. Ross and Gill are nothing but the two eyes of the panopticon, with which the subject on whom power should be exerted is being controlled, put into hold, or being kept under surveillance. They are the eyes of the surveillance of the state. State here is Claudius' power. And Hamlet is the resistance, definitely. But resistance of what kind of resistance? Is it a paradigmatic resistance? No, not at all. That is the question which has been put into focus by Guildenstern by the end of this play by Stoppard. Guildenstern says that we got his symptoms, didn't we? What kind of madness is there in Hamlet? We know that that famous thing Polonius told, that there is a method in his madness. And they are the ones who has explored the method, who has read the method, who has read into the method. They say, Ross says, half of what he said meant something else, and the other half did not mean anything at all. Guildenstern says, no. Thwarted ambition, a sin of grievance, that's my diagnosis. All of us, it's something striking that is being told by Guildenstern. This dialogue does not occur in Shakespeare's Hamlet. It is absolutely the brainchild of Stoppard. But what Stoppard does, Stoppard says that thwarted ambition, a sense of grievance, that's my diagnosis. We are being prepared in this way in our very canon of English literature. The critics to prepare us always. They bombard us with informations, with repetitive informations and scholastic criticisms and etc. etc. And we are made to think in this way over the years that Hamlet's tragedy happens because of his that existential crisis of inability of deciding between options, his procrastination, he delays the effect, he thinks a lot, he is thoughtful, he does not know what to do. He is a case of doubt and doubtfulness, to be or not to be, that is the question, blah 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 blah, and all kinds of philosophical interpretations do throng in to support all these ideas. These ideas basically buttress up, support, and at the same time maintain the essentialist configuration of Hamlet as a transcendental tragic hero. At once, Stoppard is robbing it of Hamlet. Guildenstern says that no, this is thwarted ambition. And how true is he? One passage from Hamlet, that is, I'm reading from one passage of Hamlet directly from Shakespeare's Hamlet, very short passage. I think that is not going to be a taxation upon your patience. That we simply try to, we simply not try to, we do ignore this passage when Hamlet says how he has planned the murder of the execution of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to Horatio. And to Horatio, he says that, well, this is the way that I manipulated the letter and they will be executed over there in England. Horatio is puzzled, says that is it necessary? And Hamlet says, why, man? They did make love to this employment. They are not near my conscience. I don't love them anymore. Their defeat does by their own insinuation grow. It is dangerous when the baser nature comes between the pus and fell incensed points of mighty opposites. Okay, fine. I don't love them anymore. They have become stooges in the hand of Claudius, and so therefore they are party to the conspiracy of Claudius. I have already given order to execute them. Fine. Horatio says, why? What a king is this? Horatio marvels upon the thing, because they are insignificant men. They are not doing anything out of their own volition or choice. They are being asked to do that thing by the king. They don't have any power against the king. Hamlet says, does it not? Think thee, stand me now up upon, he is Claudius, who he that hath killed my king and whored my mother. Now these are the very stock conventional charges always laid by Hamlet on Claudius and Gertrude. Then comes the very important line. Popped in between the election and my hopes, thrown out his angle for my proper life. Popped in between my election and hope. I was about to be elected the King of Denmark, and he is the one who has popped in between and thwarted my ambition. He is the one who has angled upon me. I was the big fish. But he is the one all on a sudden came here and like a predator played upon me. This Denmark is mine. After my father, I was about to be the king. Isn't it thwarted ambition? Is it only that imaginative Hamlet that we find out in this particular dialogue? It is very much the ambitious Hamlet who says that, well, he is the killer of my father. He has an incestuous relationship with my mother. But above everything else, he is the one who has deprived me of my chance to be the king. He is quite eager to be the king. This is the reading given us by Guildenstern in this play of Stoppard. Says, I'm skipping some of the parts because I have already taken a lot of time. This whole episteme of knowledge, that who is going to be the king, What is the choice? A king's son will naturally be a king. And if somebody steps in between the father and the son, then he becomes an unnatural ruler. This is basically a formulation of knowledge. There is no set rule of it. Every time Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are trying to refute and deny any status to this epistemic knowledge of understanding somebody as a greater character and somebody as a lesser character. They are resisting epistemology and they are becoming themselves, maybe insignificant, maybe meaningless, maybe very ordinary, but still they are becoming themselves from an ontological point of view. Basically, Stoppard is putting into focus intertextually the epistemic and the ontic into a conflict. Hamlet is an epistemic tragic hero, but if seen from this intertextual angle of Stoppard's text, we see that ontologically he is nothing more than a normal one. This is the statement that was being created. This is the paradigm shift, that Hamlet is no tragic one. He is just like us, another normal man who has absolutely unnecessarily killed us. We were not supposed to be killed. This is the question put by Guildenstern. How come? There is a player in the play, and there is a whole troupe of tragedians. They are conversing, and the players. You see how epistemology is challenged, pre-knowledge is challenged, the whole archive of knowledge is challenged, and how experience is prioritized over knowledge. Player says, I should concentrate on not losing your heads. Gil says, do you speak from knowledge? Player says, precedent. I don't speak from knowledge. I speak from my preceding experiences. Gil says, you have been here before. And player says, and I know which way the wind is blowing. This is absolutely the ontic question, that if I ontologically come across some experience, only that is the knowledge that I can have. The other knowledge archive, that I should think in this manner, or I should read this text in this way, these prefixed epistemic angles taken on, or perspectives taken on a text or life itself, are being denied any status, refused, and it is not reified, it is basically refuted in the text of Stoppard. Stoppard is giving us Hamlet, basically, from a different angle. Says death and awareness, death and the futility of death. This is a big issue. On death, they are reflecting, and especially Guildenstern is reflecting. And again, I am coming down to the Act 3, the third act. Their insignificant commonness is first being underlined, that they are very common and there is no point in life, and so therefore there is no point in death also. And then comes the idea of futility of death. These are all periodically developed. First, the idea of their commonness, their insignificance of life and insignificance of death. Then comes futility of death, inevitability of death, and then comes a brilliant intertextual moment with Hamlet. Gill says, it really boils down to symptoms. What is the kind of madness that Hamlet is pretending to be in? Gill says, it really boils down to symptoms. Pregnant replies, mystic illusions, mistaken identities, arguing his father is his mother, that sort of thing. Intimations of suicide, foregoing of exercise, loss of mirth, hints of claustrophobia, not to say delusions, blah, 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 etc. All these things make him a kind of a cunning poser. We are not accustomed to take Hamlet as a cunning poser. And then Ross asks, he is a player. Gill says, his play offended the king. Ross says, offended the king? Gill says, who orders his arrest? Orders his arrest? And so he escaped to England? And did he escape to England? No, he manipulated us to be killed. And then comes the pathetic awareness of being a nobody and says, again, player says, you are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. That's enough. That's all you can know and nothing more you have to know. On death, they are again talking on. And then Gill says, he snatches a dagger, and I am talking about death, and you have never experienced that. And you cannot act it. You die 1,000 casual deaths. That is a reply to the player. Basically, the player is Hamlet also, because they have similarities in looks and appearances, as it is being repeatedly told in the stage directions in the play. And then Gill is reading Hamlet, saying, denying Hamlet any transcendental or tragic chance, says, if we have a destiny, then so had he. If this is destiny that has killed us, if we are already determined to be killed, then he also has a destiny. And if this is ours, then that was his. He is nothing more than a mortal. He must die. Everybody dies. And if there are no explanation for us, because it was without any explanation that Gill and Rose were being killed by Hamlet. Suicidal Hamlet turns into a homicidal one and kills Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two nobodies, without any reason, because they did not harm Hamlet. They were merely acting under the pressure of power, just like a common man. They were the tools. They were not the brains behind the actions. Still, Hamlet killed them. Says, and if there are no explanations for us, then let there be none for him. And finally, death comes. And when death comes absolutely as an unnecessary thing. To everybody, be it the king, be it the tragic hero like Hamlet, or be it the common man like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Gill says, the last one that I'm quoting, I'm not quoting anymore, but still an age of impatience over the mind, not for us, not like that. Dying is not romantic. And death is not a game which will soon be over. Death is not anything. Death is not. It's the absence of presence. Finally, Guildenstern is coming out with his statement in Stoppard's play. It is almost like, that very book which shook the world, primarily, of course, and then it has deviated from that book or the premises of that book. In the post-colonial world, in the world of in the field of post-colonial theories, we know that very name of the book was in itself was a big thing. Empire Strikes Back. Hamlet is a big man, an elite, a procrastinating hero, an imaginative one, somebody who delays his actions and prioritizes thought upon it. He is almost a transcendental tragic hero, as being produced by or as being read by Shakespeare. But finally, the common man strikes back. Empire strikes back. Ross and Gill strikes back. The minor takes over the stage and makes the major look like a minor character, a common character, just living in between us. We find, after finishing the text, we find that there are Hamlets and Ross and Gills, all are cohabiting together inside us. Hamlet is no special one. He also kills somebody. That killing is so unnecessary that basically denies him any transcendence and demeans his heroism. All his strategies, all his plots inside the play, however imaginative is he, however beautifully rendered his romantic dialogues and soliloquies are, finally at the end of the day, he is nothing more than an ambitious prince who just lost the chance of ascending the throne and found himself in such a rage that he becomes homicidal without any meaning. He kills on everybody. He is practically setting himself on a killing spree, just like any other revengeful man. Tom Stoppard's Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, simply completing an intertextual bridge of connection between the two plays. And Stoppard keeps returning back to Shakespeare repeatedly to read him into the context of his present day. In the context of his present day, experiences, the cognitive world, the world that as we live in it, it is the ontic which is taking the place of the epistemic, and the ontic or the ontological being or the ontological truth is basically basically pushing the epistemic truth from its throne. After reading Rosengill, then naturally one question comes out that, well, can Shakespeare be taken as a very pliant character or pliant playwright who can easily be molded in such a way and who can easily be read or reread or reinterpreted in such absolutely derivative ways, different ways, deviated ways? Then we see that, as I was mentioning with a purpose earlier in my lecture, by the beginning, I'm finishing my lecture right now, and don't worry. Just quoting 3 lines only, very small 3 poetic lines, 3 or 4 poetic lines from Shakespeare's text. As I already quoted the name of Dog's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth, I tried to posit a relationship in Stoppard's policy and politics operating between this text of 1967, Rosengill and that text of 79, which is much theoretically dense, because it was basically operating on the philosophy of Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein is a cryptic philosopher, a scary one, of course, and Stoppard is almost a fan of Wittgenstein's philosophy. He keeps playing on the ideas of Wittgenstein in almost all of his plays. There also, he is for the second time taking on Shakespeare, Dog's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth. And then he does a very funny thing. He is parodying in the Derridian sense and finally reaching out to the Bakhtinian sense of polyphony. He's starting with that Derridian sense of parodying, taking Shakespeare's lines from different texts, random lines. He is just quoting random lines from different texts and collating them together, collecting them, putting them together to form a single dialogue of Shakespeare at the beginning of Dog's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth, which might be a kind of an explanation for our reading of Rosengill as an intertextual text with Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Shakespeare's Hamlet is not that much necessary to understand Rosengill, as Rosengill is necessary to give a paradigmatic different reading or take on the text of the text of Shakespeare's of the text of Shakespeare. This either way around was already being present in the dialogues of Shakespeare, in different dialogues of Shakespeare, which are, if collated together, stand out like this. In the exposition or the prologue of the play Dog's Hamlet and Cahoot's Macbeth, there appears Shakespeare, as the 2 texts are definitely Shakespearean texts, famous Shakespearean texts, Hamlet and Macbeth, and Stoppard is reworking on that. It's a reading of those 2 texts taken together with the primer of Wittgenstein's philosophy. There appears Shakespeare in the prologue, and Shakespeare says, "For this relief, much thanks." The thanks is due to the second reading, the new kind of a reading. This reading, a paradigmatic shift in the reading, says, "For this relief, much thanks. Though I am native here, that everybody knows me, still, and to the manner born, and the manner in which I am being produced and reproduced in the mind of the reader over the years, for the last 450 years, it is a custom more honored in the breach than in the observance." Any custom, any tradition should be broken. So this tradition of reading Shakespeare naturally forms a custom. Stoppard offers a breach, a break, a shift in the paradigm, and says us, let us look at the characters, look at the theme, look at the ideas, look at the philosophy operating behind the text. From the perspective of the minor characters, then we see that absolutely a different kind of a reading comes out, that Hamlet loses his transcendence, does not remain anymore a tragic one, and becomes almost a kind of a plotful one who just went on to a revengeful killing spree. He is nothing but another mortal man, very insignificant, like that of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. If Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's lives are already being determined, they mean nothing. They are basically nobodies. Then Hamlet is also equally a nobody who kills for nothing. And who kills for nothing basically lives for nothing. That is a statement created on the futility, ineffectivity, no transcendence, and at the same time unnecessariness of death, as propounded by Guildenstern by the end of Act 3. Shakespeare says, it is a custom, that is, it is the episteme, more honored in the breach is the ontology, the ontic moment, than in the observance. We cannot anymore keep observing the rituals of reading Shakespeare. We must qualify Shakespeare's reading with the help of our ontic experiences. Then one Guildenstern will one day appear and will ask us that, are you talking from knowledge? And we might be able to understand that question, the intent of the question, and might come up with the answer, like the player in Ross and Gill, and say that, well, no, I talk from experience. I don't talk from knowledge. I talk from my ontic experiences. Thank you.